The issue of police policing themselves has obviously been a huge one here in Baltimore. Justin, you've written a lot about the Gun Trace Task Force scandal here. Tell us a little bit about how you think that has impacted the community's view of the police. I ask you these like very easy, discrete questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think, yeah, that's a very complicated question, but I think at its core, it exposed corruption that I think people who were speaking out said existed, that really had not been validated to that point, in the sense that, I mean, I've covered many cases over the 11 years I've covered the department of, there's an officer here who's stealing, there's an officer here who was assaulted someone, there's an officer here who is planting drugs. They were all. It was easy for the department to dismiss those as the bad apple defense, right, because they happened one at a time, and the dots were not being connected. And this case connected the dots. You had an entire squad that had gone rogue, and they weren't. They didn't assault one person. They didn't plant drugs one time. This was a prolonged crime spree, basically.
An organized criminal enterprise, basically.
It was, and I think, I don't want to embarrass him, but one of the prosecutors in the audience, he had a great quote in that trial. He said, "This wasn't a group of officers who went rogue. They didn't come together and decide to start doing things. These were rogue officers who had been operating in this fashion for an extended period of time in different parts of the agency, who, as far as we can tell, by chance came together and sort of formed almost this all-star group of officers." And the question is sort of, all-star in a bad way, obviously, the worst of the worst. And so the question is sort of like, what are the missed signs? What should have been known? What could have been known? And that's a really hard question. I think by its nature, that probably isn't something that's done overtly, just because anyone who's committing a crime is not going to broadcast it. That's simply not good for business. But surely there are many people who knew something, who saw some degree of it. I'm interested in the fact that it's been said that there weren't very many complaints against the officers of that fashion, that they have admitted to dozens and dozens of robberies, and within their internal affairs files, there are very few complaints for that. And it speaks to sort of who they were targeting, what the expectation was for what would happen if they targeted those people, and sort of the disincentive for them to say anything. Because when you are charged with, when you do have drugs on you, you do have guns, perhaps, and some of that is taken, and your money's taken, and you know that the officers aren't telling the truth about what they took and how they got to your stuff in the first place. What is your incentive to stand up and say, I actually had more than that? I had far more drugs, and they were stolen and resold in the streets. You're going to take the best deal you can. The officers want the case to go away as well. Everybody wants it to go away, and it stays buried. And it stayed buried until this wiretap investigation, which, quite frankly, the investigators sort of fell backwards into.